Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this episode of History's Greatest Battles. As stated in the last few episodes, I'm an ardent fan of history, a fanatic if you will, but I'm not a credentialed military historian or a scholar. That means that unfortunately from time to time, despite my absolutely very best efforts, I will mispronounce place names and names of historical figures. I want to be as historically accurate as possible, so if you have any feedback, either regarding pronunciations or anything involving the episodes or the podcast at large, please click the link at the very bottom of the show notes. Shoot me a text message. I'm always happy to update my vault of knowledge that I attempt to share with other history fans. Without further ado, let's get at it.
Welcome to History's Greatest Battles, Season 1, Episode 21, The Naval Battle of Trafalgar, 21st of October, 1805. British Naval Forces, 27 ships of the line. French Naval Forces, 33 ships of the line. The thunderous victory at Trafalgar immortalized Britain as the unrivaled master of the seas, her naval dominance stretching far into the next century. Napoleon's dream of a British Isle invasion was shattered like his fleet against the rocks, his ambitions to bring England to its knees buried beneath the waves forever.
In the wake of his disastrous Egyptian campaign in 1798, a lesser man might have been crushed under the weight of his own ambitions. But Napoleon, with the cunning of a seasoned officer, not only survived, but rose from the ashes more formidable than ever. With the deftness of a master chess player, Napoleon orchestrated a coup that swept away the floundering Directory, replacing it with the Consulate. A triumvirate that he dominated as first consul, effectively crowning himself the undisputed ruler of France. In a bold strike that would echo across Europe, Napoleon dismantled the mighty Second Coalition, shattering the bonds between England, Austria, and Russia. His decisive victory at Marengo in June 1800 sent the Austrians reeling and cemented his status as the unrivaled architect of European destiny. Yet even as his star ascended, one foe remained beyond his grasp: England, the implacable island fortress. Napoleon, ever the strategist, understood that conquering this nemesis required more than just the thunder of his cannons. He needed allies, and he needed a navy capable of ruling the waves. In a bid to tip the scales, Napoleon sought to weave his own web of alliances. But the British, masters of the sea, struck a devastating blow at Copenhagen in April of 1802, their naval victory scattering Napoleon's ambitions like leaves in a storm. Undeterred by this setback, Napoleon's gaze turned towards the ports of Europe. Through either diplomatic finesse or the iron fist of conquest, he envisioned controlling these vital gateways. Such a stranglehold, he reasoned, would enable him to gather a vast, multinational fleet under his command while severing England's lifeline of trade with the continent. While plotting to dominate Europe's ports, Napoleon conceived a daring feint, a naval show of force towards Egypt that would lure the mighty Royal Navy away. With their formidable fleets distracted, Napoleon could launch an invasion force of nimble craft across the English Channel, striking at the very heart of England. With this audacious vision, he began assembling his army. The signing of the Treaty of Amiens in 1802 offered Napoleon a reprieve, a precious interval to marshal his forces. It was a fragile truce, more a pause in hostilities than a true peace, with both sides watching each other warily, bending the terms as suited their aims. Although the diversion to Egypt never materialized, Napoleon's stranglehold over Europe's coastal ports tightened with each passing day. France's occupation of the Netherlands brought the Dutch fleet under his banner, and an alliance with Spain further bolstered his naval might. With a sweeping command from the Dutch North Sea to the Franco-Italian coast, Napoleon controlled an armada of ports and a burgeoning fleet. Yet the challenge that loomed over him was colossal. Uniting these scattered ships, into a single, unstoppable force. In response, England's reaction was swift and unyielding. The Royal Navy unfurled its sails and cast a suffocating blockade over these key ports, determined to contain Napoleon's ambitions within their harbors. The Mediterranean ports of France found themselves choked by the iron grip of a British squadron led by none other than Lord Nelson, the hero of Copenhagen. Fresh from commanding near Boulogne, where Napoleon's invasion fleet was taking shape, Nelson's presence was a constant, brooding menace. A recent English raid to sabotage Napoleon's preparations had ended in ignominious failure, leaving Nelson seething with a thirst for retribution. He was eager for a confrontation, to bring the French fleet to battle, and to reclaim his pride by the sword of vengeance. 4 other British admirals held vigil over the remaining ports, but it was Nelson, the Lion of the Royal Navy, who stood as the undisputed master of the seas, his reputation eclipsing that of all other peers. For a while, the seas were eerily quiet. The fragile peace of Amiens unraveled by May 1803, yet no significant battles were waged. And the spring of 1804 passed in a tense silence, like the calm before a brewing storm. As Napoleon's forces amassed along the Channel coast, England responded with equal resolve, swelling its ranks to over 500,000 men, a formidable force that represented nearly 1/20 of the nation's population, bracing for the inevitable clash. The waiting game came to an end in May 1805, when Napoleon unleashed his plan. He commanded Admiral Villeneuve to slip past the British blockade, break free from the port of Toulon, and make a dash for the French-held islands in the West Indies. Villeneuve's mission was to unite with Commodore Honoré Ganteaume, who was biding his time to break free from the blockade at Brest. Their combined forces would wreak havoc upon English territories in the Caribbean for 2 months, sowing chaos before returning to European waters. This formidable coalition of French ships would then be powerful enough to shatter any British blockade, freeing Napoleon's fleet to form an immense and perhaps invincible armada. With the Channel defenses compromised, Napoleon's grand scheme of invasion could finally take shape, poised to deliver a crushing blow to the Royal Navy and bring England to its knees. While Nelson was momentarily absent from his station at Toulon, word reached him of Villeneuve's bold escape. Nelson, with his keen strategist's mind, suspected Egypt to be Villeneuve's target. Setting sail for Alexandria, Nelson found the harbor empty of French sails. His chase took him across the Atlantic to the West Indies, where misleading intelligence led him on a futile pursuit to Trinidad, his prey still elusive. Throughout the summer, the Atlantic became a vast chessboard, with Nelson and Villeneuve moving their fleets in a transoceanic dance, each commander in a fog of uncertainty about the other's precise locations and intentions. Frustrated but undeterred, Nelson returned to England in August, only to set sail again on September the 14th aboard his flagship, the Victory, ready to confront his elusive foe. News reached Nelson's ears like a clarion call. Villeneuve had gathered reinforcements and was headed to the Spanish port of Cadiz, setting the stage for a climactic showdown. By September 28th, Nelson's ships converged at Cadiz, assembling the full might of the British fleet under his command, the weight of fate pressing upon their sails as the prospect of battle loomed. As a master tactician, Nelson positioned a handful of vessels close enough to Cadiz to keep a vigilant eye on the Franco-Spanish fleet, while his main force lurked just beyond the horizon, ready to strike with the fury of cannon. The weeks that followed were a test of patience and resolve. Nelson drilled his captains relentlessly, imparting the tactical maneuvers that would soon alter the course of naval warfare, all the while waiting for Villeneuve to make his move. In these tense days, Nelson unveiled a revolutionary approach to naval combat, discarding the age-old tactic of parallel lines trading broadsides for a daring head-on assault. His plan was audacious. He would divide his fleet into 3 columns, attacking the enemy line perpendicularly, like a trident thrusting into the heart of the Franco-Spanish Armada. The columns would slice through the enemy line, fragmenting it into isolated clusters that would be unable to offer mutual support, sowing confusion and disorder among the Franco-Spanish ranks. Each British ship would then engage the closest adversary in brutal, hand-to-hand combat, turning the battle into a series of individual duels where the skill and the mettle of his captains and crews would reign supreme. Nelson's confidence rested on the agility of his warships, the unparalleled expertise of his captains, and the relentless discipline and deadly precision of his gunners. He gambled that once the Franco-Spanish fleet was thrown into disarray, their captains, accustomed to traditional battle lines, would be unable to adapt to the chaotic, close-quarters combat that Nelson intended to unleash. Villeneuve had no desire for a pitched battle when he cautiously slipped out of Cadiz on October the 19th. His sights were set on the Straits of Gibraltar, a path that led to Toulon, away from the shadow of Nelson's waiting fleet. As Villeneuve's ships made their way southward, Nelson shadowed them relentlessly. The Franco-Spanish fleet struggled to maintain formation, their line astern, order buckling under the pressure of pursuit on those fateful October days. At dawn on October the 21st, the tables turned. Nelson's fleet, with the wind at their backs, had outpaced Villeneuve, appearing on the horizon like avenging specters before the rocky sentinel of Gibraltar could come into view. With a fierce northwesterly wind driving his sails, Nelson watched as Villeneuve, sensing the tightening noose, turned his fleet back towards Cadiz, abandoning any hope of reaching Gibraltar. As the fleets neared the infamous Trafalgar point, Nelson gave the order that would seal his legacy. The British ships formed into 2 formidable columns, the trident now sharpened to a deadly, double-pronged spear. Nelson withdrew to his cabin, a quiet sanctuary amid the storm, where those who glimpsed him saw a man writing a prayer, words of resolve and faith inked onto the page as cannonballs began to fly. Returning to the quarterdeck with the resolve of a commander who knew his place in history, Nelson had a signal hoisted aloft. Quote, "England expects that every man will do his duty." End quote. A clarion call to courage that fluttered defiantly in the breeze. Some ships, shrouded in the chaos of preparation, never saw the message, and those that did scarcely needed the reminder, for Nelson's tactics had been drilled into their hearts and minds long before this day of reckoning. Taking his place at the head of the left column aboard the Victory, Nelson led his men with the calm assurance of a veteran of countless battles, while Vice Admiral Cuthbert Collingwood commanded the right column, his ship, Royal Sovereign, ready to plunge into the fray. As the sun reached its zenith on October the 21st, the battle erupted. Royal Sovereign, leading Collingwood's column, was the first to breach the enemy line, cleaving through the Franco-Spanish ships like a hot blade, severing their formation. By 1 p.m., Nelson's Victory was fully engaged in the maelstrom of battle. His daring tactics bore fruit as the leading French vessels struggled to turn back and aid their comrades. English captains, unrelenting and ruthless, pressed their advantage, targeting the disoriented and isolated enemy ships. The Franco-Spanish fleet, its cohesion utterly shattered, spiraled into chaos, its ships floundering like wounded beasts amid the relentless British onslaught. In the midst of the melee, the French ship, Redoubtable, closed with victory, and from its rigging, a sharpshooter's bullet found its mark. Nelson, the Lion of Britain, was struck down. the lead ball piercing his shoulder and driving into his spine. As the pain consumed him, he was carried below deck, a cloth draped over his face to conceal his identity from the crew, whose morale might shatter if they knew their admiral had fallen. For 3 agonizing hours, Nelson lingered, his life slipping away with each shallow breath. The ship's surgeons, powerless against such a wound, could only offer comfort. As the afternoon wore on, the news he longed to hear finally reached him. The English had triumphed. The ship's log, a somber witness to history, noted, quote, "Partial firing continued until 4:30, when a victory having been reported to the Right Honorable Lord Viscount Nelson and Commander-in-Chief, he then died of his wound." End quote. Though 18 French and Spanish vessels lowered their colors in surrender, the very storm that had propelled the English to victory now tore through the aftermath, scattering both conquerors and captives. A mere 4 ships could be seized as prizes from the Tempest's grip. The contrast was stark. The English, victorious and largely intact, lost not a single ship. 24 men fell, and around 100 were wounded, a small price for such a momentous victory. The vessel Victory charted its course for Gibraltar, carrying the fallen hero's body preserved in a cask of brandy, the admiral's lifeless form, a solemn cargo on its hallowed deck. Legends abound in the hallowed halls of St. Paul's Cathedral, where it is said that soldiers, in a macabre tribute, drink from the cask meant for Nelson's preservation. Thus, the grog of the Royal Navy earned its enduring moniker, Nelson's Blood. Initially, the victory at Trafalgar appeared to yield little tangible benefit. Napoleon, undeterred, soon after triumphed spectacularly over Austrian forces at Ulm and again at Austerlitz, where he routed the combined might of Austria and Russia. Yet the ripples of Trafalgar's waters would shape the course of history in profound ways, starting with the death of Nelson himself, a colossal figure in the annals of naval warfare, his loss casting a shadow over the British fleet. Nelson had been a titan, not only within the Royal Navy, but across the realm of naval combat, his strategies and daring setting him apart. He perished a hero, and even had he survived, it is doubtful he could have ever eclipsed the monumental achievement of that fateful October day in 1805. In the wake of Trafalgar, England's mastery of the seas was unchallenged, and it would not see the likes of serious naval combat again until the clash of dreadnoughts at Jutland over a century later in 1916. Another profound outcome was the sustained blockade that England maintained, with no significant naval engagements to disrupt it. Napoleon's fleets remained trapped, bottled up in their harbors, unable to break free. Apart from a minor skirmish against a Franco-Venetian force at Lissa in the Adriatic in 1811, the monotony of blockade duty remained unbroken, the long watch over the French ports becoming the daily grind of the Royal Navy. Bereft of a viable navy, Napoleon's dream of invading England was rendered impotent, and even the harassment of British interests across the globe was now beyond his reach. Frustrated by his inability to control the seas, Napoleon turned his efforts to the continental system, a sweeping embargo designed to cripple England's economy by cutting off its access to European markets. The prolonged blockade had unintended consequences across the Atlantic. To man their fleets, the British resorted to the controversial practice of impressment, forcibly conscripting foreign sailors, most often Americans, into the Royal Navy's service. These acts, bordering on piracy and flagrantly violating international norms, were compounded by the restrictive trade measures of England's Orders in Council of 1806. The cumulative outrage fanned the flames of American anger, helping to culminate in the War of 1812. In Europe, the implications of Trafalgar were even more significant. England's command of the seas enabled the deployment of troops onto the continent, beginning in Portugal and Spain in 1809. This marked the onset of the so-called Spanish Ulcer, a draining guerrilla conflict that sapped French strength and honed the battle-hardened British Army. The grueling campaigns in Spain, bolstered by Britain's unchallenged naval dominance, played a crucial role in the cascade of events that ultimately led to Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo in 1815. Though Napoleon had bested every major continental power at least once, England emerged as the unyielding force behind the coalition that finally overthrew him. Indeed, the seeds of victory at Waterloo were sown a decade earlier in the winds and waves of Trafalgar. England's naval supremacy, solidified at Trafalgar, endured unchallenged until the onset of World War II, a supremacy hard-won through centuries of maritime rivalry against both French and Dutch fleets. This unassailable command of the seas facilitated the vast expansion of the British Empire during the 19th century, yet it also sowed seeds of envy, particularly in Germany, whose naval arms race against Britain in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was a contributing factor to the eruption of World War I. The naval supremacy enshrined at Trafalgar safeguarded England from the specter of a French invasion during the early 19th century, just as it would again shield the British Isles from the threat of German invasion during the dark days of 1940.